Hi and welcome back to a new video. AMD is once again launching a new CPU. A CPU that would have been very interesting about 1.5 years ago, but today is probably no longer relevant. That's how you can, from my opinion, summarize the 9950X 3D2. AMD now offers a Ryzen 9000 with dual CCDs that both offer 3D V-Cache. And just going by the technical specs, this is probably the most impressive desktop CPU you could buy, but you probably shouldn't buy. And today we will talk about why. Grizzly Duronaut is our new high-end thermal paste and the successor of Cryonaut. It's even better performing, it is much easier to apply, it is cheaper, and it's much more durable. That's where the name comes from. Especially if you're now maybe considering to buy a new PC, then I would highly recommend that you're looking into this thermal paste. So let's continue with this video. About 1.5 years ago, AMD launched the 9950X 3D. And just prior to launch, people were discussing that a lot of enthusiasts wanted to see a real enthusiast CPU with 16 3D V-Cache cores. That is what's happening now. 16 cores and over 200 megabytes of cache on the CPUs are certainly impressive. And you might also notice that AMD increased the TDP of this CPU, at least compared to the 9950X 3D. And also compared to the 9950X 3D, we now have two Zen 5 CCDs that both carry the 3D V-Cache on the bottom. Physically, this CPU is no different to the 9950X 3D. It has a different naming, obviously, X3D2 and also dual edition. But apart from that, no changes physically. And that also means it should be compatible to everything else, like coolers, direct die, and also, for example, the lidders. The problem for AMD with this CPU is kind of AMD themselves, at least from my opinion, because they left a huge time gap between both launches of the X3D to the X3D2. But there is not a big technical gap, right? So it's only increased to 8 additional 3D V-Cache cores, but we also know that most games will not be able to make any kind of use of this. And this is also why even AMD's own presentation is not really impressive. We are talking about some render and AI applications getting a performance increase of like 7%, productivity sometimes 3%, but not really any gain in performance of gaming versus the 9950X 3D. But all this was kind of expected, right? We did not expect huge performance gains by just adding a little bit more cache, because most games won't be able to make use of this. You can only pretty much expect performance gains in synthetic benchmarks. The biggest gain I could observe was in 3D Profile Max with 18,456 points. The 9950X 3D2 had a performance increase of 11% over the normal 9950X 3D. But also at the same time, it increased 8% in power draw with about 184 watts in the benchmark. There is also an increase in performance in the all-time classic Cinebench. But before we jump into the results, I want to jump into the system and just show you how the CPU behaves. If we're launching R23, can see as expected that the Ryzen 9000 CCDs are clocking a little bit differently. So that is, as expected, two different CCDs. One is clocking about 5150, the other one at about 5050. So we have about 100 megahertz clock difference between the two CCDs, at least for my individual CPU. Might be different for each individual one. And we are seeing a package power draw that is a bit higher than in the past. We're seeing about 250 watts under load, which is expected because of the extra cache, which also needs current. And then we can see a resulting core temperature of about 70 degrees Celsius. So it's the same kind of changes that AMD made from 9800X 3D. And this definitely helps to keep the cores still rather cool, even at about 250 watts. But of course, the low temperatures are also a result of me using a custom water cooling setup. We have a water temperature of about 26 degrees Celsius. So if you would run this, for example, with a 360 AIO, I would say that it's expected to see at least 80 degrees Celsius or sometimes even probably 90 degrees Celsius if you keep running Cinebench, even with the stock settings, simply because it's just 250 watts in the end. Now, if we take the average of 5 clean runs, then I ended up at 44,021 points. And as you could just observe, the CPU is pulling about 250 watts in this scenario. So that means it's a performance increase of about 5% over the 9950X 3D. But at the same time, the power consumption increased by 25%. This puts the CPU in Cinebench on the same level as the 270K Plus from Intel, which consumes 10% less power and costs about a third of the price. AMD had no other choice than increasing the TDP, because if you're adding more cache and you want to keep the clocks the same on both CCDs, you simply have to increase the TDP. There is no way around it, and this is obviously hurting efficiency in those kind of scenarios. And now, even though AMD said there is no performance gain expected in gaming, I still tested this. In Star Wars Outlaws 1080p, I could observe a small performance gain. But in general, you can see that most of the CPUs here just perform exactly the same, because I think that this is just running into the GPU limit with the RTX 5090, even at 1080p. So there's almost no difference. And the small difference is probably because I was just lazy and did not retest for this CPU in like all of the games, because it just probably is a waste of time. And then I think the small performance increase could just be the different GPU driver. So same thing in Counter-Strike 2 4K with max details. The X3D2 is a little bit faster, but also consumes 8 watts more power compared to the 9950X 3D. And also, again, same thing in Cyberpunk 2077 in 1080p. Minimum FPS increased a little bit, but we're also seeing a power increase of 13%. Now, if we switch to something more realistic, so Cyberpunk in 4K resolution, you can see an even bigger difference, or you can't see it. There's almost no difference within the CPUs, but you can see a bigger difference in the power draw. 9950X 3D2 consumes 117 watts and thus is less efficient. Honestly, I'm glad that I did not retest everything to just prove the point that nothing really changed. The only thing that changed for me is if you add like all the benchmarks together, even with the synthetic ones, I'm seeing like an overall performance increase of 3 to 5%, but also a power increase of about 20%. So compared to the 9950X 3D, CPU is just much less efficient with almost no performance gain. And that's how I'm going back all the way to the beginning, where I said that if you're looking at a CPU from just technical specs, absolutely impressive. Solid CPU, and I'm pretty sure if you would build a system now with this CPU, you would have fun with this for a very long time. It should be a very solid base. But apparently the CPU is going to cost about $900, which is compared to the 9950X 3D, it's ridiculous, right? You're getting almost no performance increase. You're getting a solid power consumption increase, which you don't want, but you will get it for a lot more money. And then there is also like now Intel with the 270K plus, which is very good price performance. Just like objectively, the CPU makes no sense. I'm not judging anyone who wants it. Like, you know, who am I to judge this kind of thing? If you want it, if you want to buy it, sure, go ahead. But if you want an objective advice, it makes no sense. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time. Bye bye.